In my second year of formation with the Missionaries of God's Love Brothers, I read a book that had a huge impact on me. It was the autobiography of St Thérèse of Lisieux. St Thérèse was a French Carmelite nun who entered a cloistered convent as a teenager and died at the age of 24. This might seem at surface level like a rather narrow, confined life, but when you read Thérèse's writings, you get the impression of this expansiveness and liberty. And I remember that as I read this book, Thérèse was dropping truth bombs that shattered in my face and led me to the distressing realization that up until that point, I've been doing the Christian life all wrong. When I was in primary school, I was the shortest kid in my class. I was also pretty sensitive and a slow eater. As I grew up and became more self-conscious, I began to carry around this insecurity and frustration because of my littleness. And having the last name Last probably didn't help that much either. But I came to discover that one way that I could feel big and strong was through achieving. I felt good about myself when I came out top of the class or was recognized with various awards. And I ended up graduating high school as college dux and school captain. I enjoyed my school years, but looking back on them later in life, I realized that I had found my identity and my worth in being successful. I had learnt to resist any form of littleness and weakness, always striving to be the best. This modus operandi may have set me up for success in the career path that I pursued after school as a professional flautist. There was no room for error here. Every note had to be perfect. But I suppose that I'd unconsciously transposed this way of thinking also to my spiritual life, striving to climb the ladder of holiness. And so whenever I encountered weakness or failure in my moral life, I became very frustrated and ashamed. The thing that St Thérèse taught me that totally revolutionized my relationship with God is the lesson that Jesus presents in our gospel today. Happy are the poor in spirit. The kingdom of heaven is theirs. Now, no doubt I'd heard these words before, but it wasn't until I read St. Thérèse that I truly grasped their meaning. So what does it mean to be poor in spirit? At first, it doesn't sound like something we should aspire to. Surely we should want to be rich in spirit, right? Spiritual poverty involves coming to know and accept the truth that I am weak and little. To be poor in spirit is to humbly acknowledge that I need God. It is to relate to God with this posture of trust and dependence, like a little child who trusts in their father. St. Thérèse provides a striking image that illustrates spiritual poverty. She gives us this image of a little child that is learning to stand but can't quite yet walk. If you're parents, I'm sure you remember what that was like with your kids. And this little child is trying to climb up a flight of stairs, and he lifts his little foot, trying to reach for the first stair, but it's all in vain, and he falls down. But then God, seeing the child and looking upon him with great compassion, comes down the stairs, picks up the child in his arms, and carries him to the top of the stairs. St. Thérèse tells this story to illustrate the secret to holiness that she discovered. Every single person is called by God to holiness. But holiness is not about striving to climb the ladder of perfection by our own efforts. St. Thérèse found a shortcut, which she calls her little way. If we want to be holy, all we need to do is to be like a little child. Simply, right on cue, thank you. simply to trust in God, depend on God, and allow God to carry us to where we cannot walk on our own. St. Teresa's little way is the opposite of what we might call spiritual pride, an attitude where we reject our weakness and strive to live the Christian life by our own efforts. We see pride manifest when a person refuses to accept help. For example, if you're lost but you won't ask for directions. Spiritual pride involves refusing to accept God's help. Spiritual pride can make us severe with ourselves and critical towards others. And underneath it is a lack of trust in God. Looking back on my life, I can see how my own insecurities and perfectionism made me vulnerable to spiritual pride. I was certainly earnest in my desire to be faithful and to be holy, but I was unwilling to accept my littleness and weakness. To be spiritually poor is to come before God with open hands like a beggar and to pray, "Lord, have mercy on me. Lord, I need you. Lord, save me." The proud of heart are unable to pray such prayers. Returning to our gospel, Jesus says, "Happy are the poor in spirit," or "Blessed are the poor in spirit." Why are the poor in spirit happy or blessed? Because in acknowledging their need and their littleness, they may experience the loving care of God our Father, just like the dad who scoops up the kid in his arms. Because they are humble enough to ask for help, they receive God's help. Because they trust in God their Father, they don't have to strive and struggle all on their own. Instead, they experience the joy and the freedom of living as God's children. Through baptism, we become children of God. We are called into a relationship that involves receiving God's love and depending on God to meet our needs. This is an incredible gift. But we can, without realizing it, resist truly living our baptismal identity as God's beloved children. And it certainly doesn't help that the culture around us tells us to be independent and self-sufficient, the opposite of being spiritually poor. If we are going to accept our littleness and weakness, I suppose a critical question for us to grapple with is this: if I let myself be weak and dependent, can I trust that God will actually help me? Scripture tells us of a God who intervenes and comes to the aid of his people. But what does that look like now in my life? God's help or God's grace is not like waving a magic wand. God's help may come to us in a way that we do not expect or hope for. Grace often works in our life in slow and hidden ways, and often through times of suffering. St. Therese teaches us that we will only receive God's help to the degree that we consent to being little. It's by allowing ourselves to be poor and dependent that we may experience the power and strength of God within us. As St. Paul writes, "I am content with weaknesses for the sake of Christ, for when I am weak, then I am strong." The invitation for us today is to accept and embrace our own littleness, to let go of that prideful quest of doing it all on our own. Those who are poor in spirit will experience the happiness and the blessing of being loved, cared for, and helped by God our Father. The kingdom of heaven is theirs because God carries them to the top of the staircase. Remain little and poor before God, trusting and dependent, and God will carry you to the heights of holiness. So friends, let us come before God in this Mass and in our lives, just like little kids, aware of our needs and confidently asking God for his saving help. How happy are the poor in spirit! The kingdom of heaven is theirs.